So if you want to design for the web and for the internet, it's a good idea that you understand to some degree of detail how the web and the internet work. So do you know how the internet works? Do you know what the internet is? I suspect you think you know what the internet is. You know that it's not, something inside your computer. I don't have internet. I didn't buy internet for this computer. You realize that it's some sort of network of the world's computers, kind of all tied together in some sense. And in some sense that's right, but I think at a more basic level the internet could be described as an agreement. That is, anyone who wants to engage in a conversation or jump into this network has to agree to a certain set of ground rules, not because they're particularly strict rules, but because otherwise you can't have a conversation. You can't know when someone is supposed to speak, or when one computer is supposed to speak, or how to exchange messages. So at the very basic level, the internet is a set of protocols, a set of rules by which people can exchange and machines can exchange messages. And it really is a set of layers of protocols. So at the very base level, it says, this is how you send an electronic signal down the line so that people can register that signal. And then the next level up is sort of how do you take a document and slice it into pieces that are the right size, and how do you get those pieces to go from one computer to another and eventually arrive at the right destination. So there's a set of agreements at a very basic level that says how do you get these computers to talk to each other. Then layered on top of that, there's a bunch of protocols for different kinds of things. Now, these days a lot of people use the words web and internet or web and net pretty interchangeably, but of course there's lots of things that we do on the internet that have nothing to do with the web. Sure, especially recently, a lot of the things that we used to do separately are moving onto the web, or at least using the web as a gateway. So, for example, you might check your email and collaborate on a document and even do something like be involved in a video chat through the web interface in a way that you didn't used to be. But the protocols themselves are still separate. And in fact, there's lots of things you do on the net that you may not even realize are on the net, like what used to be called plain old telephone service, where you pick up the telephone and you make a call. A lot of that is now handled over an internet-like interface, or over the internet itself, depending on how you define the internet. So there's lots of stuff that happens that's not this web set of protocols, but the web protocols are what we're interested in for this series of videos. And the web protocols are used to basically transport hypertext documents. So what's a hypertext document? Well, you know what a Microsoft Word document is, right? Or you might talk about an image being a document, or even a movie file being some kind of a document. So a hypertext document is a particular kind of document in which hypertext is embedded, and hypertext is simply a way of connecting documents with links inside the document itself. Pretty simple. It doesn't have to be on the web. Hypertext can exist on a single computer. You could set up a hypertext document that linked back and forth among a set of pages or a set of documents on a single computer without ever being on the web. But the nice thing about the web is you can share these documents across the world. And so Hypertext Transport Protocol, HTTP, which may sound vaguely familiar if you've ever typed a URL, is the process or the set of rules, the protocols that allow for the exchange of these web pages. What does that protocol look like? Well, it's based on a model called client-server model, or client-server architecture, in which one computer acts as the client and the other acts as a server. And if you've ever been to Starbucks, you know how that works. The client comes in and asks for something. The server does something behind the counter and delivers whatever the client has asked for. How does the client ask for something? The client asks by typing in a URL or by clicking a link, which is basically another form of requesting a URL. So my computer right now is set up as a client, and in fact it could be a server. There's servers all over the place. Servers are just computers that are set up to provide services. In fact, the little boxes back here are all servers of sorts. In fact, the white one is a web server of sorts. Both are web servers of sorts. And so servers are all over the place. There's servers in your car at this point that are providing services to clients. But in terms of web servers, they're usually computers that are set up with a stack of software, a suite of software, which we'll talk about later on when we talk about web hosts. And this is the computer you usually use, or maybe you're using a phone or something as a client. So what you do is you go and you type in a URL. I was looking earlier at a site that had information about at CNN, an article about brain-machine interfaces, and it should still be in the queue here. So I pull up the brain-machine interfaces site, and you'll see that I have this long URL. Now URLs have a bunch of pieces. We're going to concern ourselves only with, let's say 3 right now, well 3 or 4 depending on how you measure it. The first is that HTTP piece, and we'll just leave that for now. The vast majority of sites that you're going to pull down are going to use that HTTP:// piece. What that says is that you want the browser to use HTTP to get your document. That's the normal way that you use the web. There's some variations on that, but we'll leave it for now. The next piece is the name of the server on which the document you want is located. So somewhere in Atlanta there's a server that's named CNN.com, and it goes to that server and says, I want a particular document. Everything after the name of the server, the domain name, is the location of that document. All right, so that whole thing is the combination of the directories or folders that the document is in, and then the very last one after the last slash is the actual name of the file itself. So let's take a look. For example, in this case, it says go to the computer at CNN.com, look in the directory called 2009, and again, directories are, some of you now are more used to calling these folders. And directory structures used to be fairly familiar if you used a command line interface, but many of you are young enough that you've never really had or had any desire to use a command line interface. Hopefully I'll cure you of that in the coming videos. But for now, we'll look at this. 2009 is one of the directories or folders that it's in, and inside that folder there's a directory called tech, and inside that is one called 12, and inside that is another directory called 30, and inside that is another directory called brain-controlled computers, and inside that is a file called index.html. So each one of those is a directory inside a directory inside a directory. Obviously the CNN site is fairly complex, and you have to kind of sort things out in a way that makes sense. It seems like a strange name for a file, index.html, but that's what you're going to name at least one file every time you make a website. Why is that? When if you include only the domain name and the directories, the directory that you're looking for, and you omit the file name, the server will assume that what you're looking for is index.html or some other default file. But usually index.html. We'll stick with that for now. So if I omit this, if I get delete index.html and just look for that directory, brain-controlled computers /, it will call up the same thing because this is actually index.html. That's what it looks for. If instead I look for a file called bob.html in that same directory, it will give me an error saying that the page is not found, a 404 error, because there is no page called bob.html. But if I leave it off, if I leave it blank, it will assume that I want index.html. And you'll note that in many cases when you put in a URL, for example, if I put in www.google.com, I don't include either directories because I'm going to use the stuff at the very top of the directory tree with assuming that there's no directories that the file's in, and it looks for index.html. I haven't typed it, but the server will assume that that's what I'm looking for. In fact, if I type index.html, you'll see it is that page that we're so familiar with. So that's the basic idea. URLs go to the server and they get a file off that server. And later on we'll talk a little bit about how we can get files onto those servers and how we can find a server to get those files onto. And then how we can make sure that server is named what we want it to be named. Until then, I'll see you next time.